Century 21 Real Estate. He has ranked number 31 out of over 8,000 offices, has successfully overseen 12,000 closed transactions in Ventura County. Ventura County currently is a very competitive market. If you've been following trends, listening to the radio or anything like that, you will see that it is a highly, highly competitive market. Brandon enjoys what he does. He loves working with our buyers here at BCCCDC. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the reins over to Brandon. So Brandon, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for that nice introduction, Francine. And not to throw a curveball, but do you mind pulling up the presentation and doing the slides for us while we go through this?
Not a problem. Keeping it spicy here at BCCCDC. We like to make sure people are paying attention.
I appreciate that.
Go ahead. There we go. Off to the first screen.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I get very excited about doing this class. This is one of my favorite things to do. It's to empower the public, buyers in particular, on their first purchase. My dad's taught these for over 20 years. I've taught it, as Francine mentioned, with BCCDC, and had a lot of experience just helping people purchase their first home. I believe we've successfully closed over 130 ourselves. Started back in 2004, and it is by far my favorite thing to do. And the biggest thing I want to acknowledge just right out the gate is that we know that this is an overwhelming process. We know that there are a lot of people who mean well out there, who will try to tell you their best advice or input. It could be a family member, it could be somebody who's bought or sold maybe 1 or 2 properties previously, and they want to share some tips. The one thing I can tell you is rely on your professionals, rely on the people who do this every day for a living, and you want to trust your gut feeling. So if you feel somebody's looking out for your best interest, pay attention to that. And there are some great agents out there who are going to look out for your best interest, and this is what they do. So before we get going, we will have, we're going to talk about, I'm just going to give, touch on some pointers. We're going to talk about, the different terminology that's important to understand through this process. We're also going to discuss some tips to get your offer accepted. As Francine mentioned, we're in a very competitive marketplace. There's a lot of buyer demand. There's very little inventory. The good news is the inventory is starting to fill up. We're starting to see more and more listings hitting the market, and it's getting to that time of the year that it really starts picking up. So we're also talking to many sellers. And there's a lot of sellers who want to move out of state. There's sellers who want to retire. There's sellers who want to move up, move down. So it's all coming. So the better you can get prepared right now, and that's our goal, is to give you a good basic understanding of what to expect in the process. So you know what questions to ask your agent, the better off you're going to be, where you feel empowered and not completely reliant on the professional who you're putting all your faith and your trust in. Does that make sense? I always forget that we can't get the feedback on this one. So it makes it a little bit different. But so let's jump into the 3 types of professionals. So to start off with, you have a real estate broker, you have a real estate agent, and you have a realtor. Realtor is a designation that real estate agents and brokers can have. They pay dues, they're held to a higher standard. So there's a code of ethics. If something goes south or goes wrong, you got a little bit more that you can research on them, and you can basically file a complaint, and there's things that you can do if they're an actual realtor. Real estate broker versus an agent. A broker can be a regular broker, meaning broker of record, which is like the owner of the company. They're the boss. They're the ones liable for all their agents under them. Then you have the real estate agent who has to hang their license with the broker. There's also what's called a broker associate. A broker associate can hang their license with a broker of record. So I know it can sound confusing. The benefit to working with a broker, it requires a little bit more certification and classes. I'm actually working on those classes at this time. There's quite a bit of hours that you have to complete, and you have to be a full-time licensed agent for at least 2 years before you can even qualify to be a broker. So, but if you have issues with your agent and you're under contract, either buyer broker agreement or listing agreement, and you need somebody to talk to, you want to find out who the broker of record is, reach out to them and go from there. Realtor.com, that's on the bottom there. That's a good site to try to look up agents. You can also check out what's called dre.ca.gov. And for every single licensed agent, there is a track record, or even complaints can be filed, and you can look them up to see if there's been any type of disciplinary action that has been taken on that agent. It becomes public record. So that's again on dre.ca.gov. You can type in their name or their license number and look them up and do your due diligence on that. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so as we talk about the market, it's important to understand agents and the different parties and the roles that they play. So you're going to understand what their duties are and what your duties are as a buyer. Okay, so a listing agent represents the seller. Then you have a buyer's agent who represents the buyer. You can have a dual agent who represents both the seller and the buyer. Now, the one important thing to know is that your agent has a fiduciary duty to look out for your financial best interest. And what that means is, the way I explain it is, I'm always going to take care of my clients the same way I'm going to take care of my family, look out for their financial best interest, because contractually, I can commit you to something legally, good or bad, that can have some serious consequences for you. So you want to understand the importance of that relationship. That's also why it's very important that if you don't like the representation you're getting, that you change that. There's plenty of agents out there, plenty of good agents. Usually a good way to find out is by word of mouth from other people who have previously closed with a good agent that they like to work with. Now, how commissions work. You as a buyer do not pay a commission directly to your agent. It is very rare that that happens. So in most situations, it's going to be the seller who pays their listing agent, and then they pay their buyer's agent. And the buyer's agent is like almost like a finder's fee. So I'm going to work with a buyer that commits to working with me and says, I want you to be my agent. Then I'm going to go out and help them get qualified. If they've already been qualified, then I'm going to start showing them properties. And then if we see a property we like, I'm going to ask a lot of questions to the listing agent to find out, okay, are they presenting offers right away? Do they have any offers in hand? If they're not presenting right away, when are they going to present them? And then I'm going to try to get a feel for where the offers are at, what types of offers are in, what types of buyers, have submitted offers. What are the timelines for the sellers? These are all questions I'm going to ask to try to give us the best chance at getting our offer accepted. Okay, next slide, please. So your agent's role. One of the first things we do with our clients is we set up, typically these days, a Zoom meeting, and we're going to discuss what their needs and their wants are. And it's very important for us to do discovery and understand what our clients want, as well as what their expectations are in their agent, or the expectations of the agent on the client. What I mean by that is, I'm only going to spend my time with roughly about 3 to 5 clients at one time that are motivated, that are ready to purchase at this point in time. And if not, then we can help get them ready. But I have to be fair to the clients that have committed to me and who are, have said they want me to represent them, and they want to go out and check out properties and do things. If I make myself available to everybody and people who have not committed to me, it's not fair to the ones that have committed. So most agents are going to work like that. Provide background information and market data. And please, when I talk about myself as an example, I'm not pushing myself on any of you. This is to give you the mindset of an agent, so that you understand, because I've had clients, or not even clients, friends call me up who wanted to do their own thing. And they're like, how come I call all these agents and I tell all of them I don't want to work with any of them. I only want to work with the one who has the listing. And why don't any of them take me seriously? And it's like, I know I can get qualified, but I haven't gotten a pre-approval yet. And the reason why, and I had to be very direct with them, I said, look, number one, you haven't committed to anybody. So they're not going to spend their time with you if you're not going to commit that you're going to work with them. Number two, I said, you're not even pre-approved yet. So you have to get pre-approved before the agent knows that you financially can actually afford what it is that you're trying to look for. So you have to show some effort on your part, along with the agent that you trust, so that they know that you're both moving towards the right direction. And in this kind of competitive market, if you don't have all your ducks in a row, when you finally find the property that you want, it's going to be too late. So you have to be very proactive. Okay. So the agent is going to talk to you about the market. They're also going to help you locate and show properties. A lot of times the buyers will find the properties themselves. You have access to Redfin, Zillow, all these different sites. Some of them, the information isn't always as real time, meaning it's not instantly. Your agent should have real time information. And even that still isn't always 100% accurate, meaning the house could already be in escrow. They could have already accepted offers. So before you start going to see properties, your agent should reach out to those listing agents, make sure it's available before you start spending your time to hurry up and try to go see a property in a market that's moving like today. So they're also going to negotiate on your behalf. Not only do they negotiate the price up front, they're also going to negotiate if you have a low appraisal or an appraisal issue. That's another chance to renegotiate after your offer gets accepted. And we're going to talk about this as we go through the timeline. They also have a chance to negotiate the request for repairs. And so the repairs, you could go through and see the property and then find some things that need to be fixed, and they're going to help you negotiate there. In certain markets, you can ask for more. Markets like today, it gets very difficult to negotiate for repairs. There's only a few things by law that a seller has to complete or have up to code before they close the transaction. Okay. So next, they're going to explain the escrow process and timelines, which we're going to touch on today. And then they're also going to ensure the transaction closes and resolve any issues or problems that come up. Next slide, please. So as you're interviewing your agent, it's highly recommended that you interview multiple agents before committing. Here are a few questions you should ask. Do you work as a full-time agent? How long have you been licensed? How many transactions do you close in a year? Are you knowledgeable about my community? And will you request a buyer broker agreement? So I like these questions. Most importantly, I like to ask the question, how many have you done in the last 6 months to the last year? Because just because an agent's been doing this for 20 plus years, if they've only done a couple in the last year, we're in a very different market this year versus years previously, or even 10 years, or even 6 months to a year ago. Last 3 months has been some drastic changes. So you want to see how active they've been in the last 6 months to a year. Another question I would ask is, are they a part of a team or do they work by themselves? That's important to know because there can be some pros and cons to both. Sometimes you'll call a top agent who runs a team, and when you call that agent, you think that's who you're going to be working with, and you're actually working with another agent. So you just want to understand how that all works out. I actually run a team, and we have a very successful track record with our team, and each person plays their role, and we all work together to help out each client. And we're very successful with that. And that also helps us be able to help more people out at one time. And as I mentioned, my bandwidth typically is about 3 to 5 buyers at one time. Once it starts getting to 6 to 7, it gets pretty crazy. And it's not doing it justice when you're in a competitive market like this to overcommit to more than that. So how many transactions do you close in a year? And then the buyer broker agreement. The amount of transactions, I would say if your agent is closing somewhere between 10 to 20, you got a pretty good agent here in Ventura County. 10 to 20 or more, you're with a good agent. If your agent's only done 2 to 4 in the past year, you may want to ask some questions. If you like them and you see that they're a hard worker and they seem competent and they seem like they either have a mentor or they're a part of a team that does more volume and they have the resources around them, you may still be in pretty good hands. So you got to trust your judgment on that. Buyer broker agreement is an actual agreement that says you are committed to working with a particular agent. I typically don't require that for our clients. It's just based on trust and word of mouth, but some agents do require it. And I actually have had clients who want to be under a buyer broker with me to make sure that that it is very clear that I am representing that client and they know that there can be some advantages to that as well. So next slide, please. So your role as a buyer, be ready. Communication is number one most important thing I can stress and emphasize as we talk about what your role is as a buyer. You want to communicate your expectations to your agent. You want to, share with them, okay, how do I like to be communicated to? What are my work hours? What's my availability? When's the best time to go see properties? And in a market like this, you're going to see something and want to jump and go see it right away. So is text the best way? Is email, is phone calls the best way? Always constantly communicating with your client or your agent is extremely important. And what you'll find out is as you learn the market and you see what's out there, your needs and your wants can change some because you're going to see how competitive it is. And you're going to see that, okay, we gotta concede on some of the things that were absolute must-haves before, because it's just too expensive to be able to afford that. It says, do not sign forms you do not understand what they mean. The biggest one to be careful for is that buyer representation agreement. If you're not 100% sure if that's the agent you want to work with or not, and they mandate that you sign that, you could have some issues down the road if you don't like them and want to try to get out of that relationship. Most agents, I would say a lot of agents aren't going to require that. So just again, it's called a buyer representation agreement, and it could say an exclusive agreement, or there's another one as well, but the buyer rep agreement is what you're looking for. Next slide, please. Creating your wish list. So location, privacy, responsibility, maintenance, amenities, and affordability. Just some basic things to kind of think about, and you'll see it come up on another slide. Try to drive to the property in the neighborhood that you're interested in at different times of the day. And this was a bigger deal pre-COVID when most people went off to work. You would see a home during the day at 2 o'clock. There's no cars on the street. You come on the weekend and there was nowhere to park. So you want to understand that during your due diligence period. Take your time to go out, drive, and then talk to neighbors. If neighbors are willing to share with you what their feelings about the neighborhood, how long they've been there, what they like, what they don't like, you'll get a lot of info from them as well. Next slide, please. So tips for looking at properties. This is what we just talked about. Drive through the neighborhood, go to the area during different times of the day, try viewing more than one property at a time. And that's just to try to be efficient. You're not always going to have 3-4 homes to see at the same time in this kind of market. But if you can see 2 at one time, that's good too, to give you kind of a reference. Because one of the biggest hesitations I would say is you may walk into a home, it fits your budget, you like what you see, but it's the first one that you've seen. So you may think the grass is greener out there. Well, if you got a good agent, and this is how I train our agents as well, is you want to take them to the best property first. So if I'm taking you, I'm going to cut through all the fat. I'm going to look through the list of 10 homes, if there are 10 homes available in your price point, and I'm going to show you the top 2 or 3 properties that I know are the best deals at this point in time on this market. Now, the thing is if a property is one of those best opportunities, there's a good chance there's another 15, 20, 30 buyers that are also interested in that particular property. So those hot properties, I always say it's like bucket A and bucket B. The bucket A is the HGTV property that looks beautiful, moving, ready to go. And everybody wants it. As soon as it hit, it looks like it's priced well. You see a line out the door a lot of times as you try to go show the property. When you see those kinds of homes, you are definitely going to be in a multiple offer situation. So you got to come in with your best foot forward first. Don't expect that you're going to come in once and hope for a counter. There's a lot of times you don't even get a counter. So you got to be one of the top 3 to 5 offers to even be considered for a counter. So this is where you're really going to heavily rely on your agent to give you the right type of advice. Next slide, please. The purchase process, making an offer. So some key point or factors to look at or questions that you can ask your agent is, how long has the property been on the market? When I talked about bucket A and bucket B, bucket A is what everybody wants that just hit the market and everybody wants to rush over and see that home. Bucket B is a property that may have been on the market for more than 20 to 30 days in this market that's still active. That's usually a red flag. It's a red flag that that property may be overpriced. It's also a red flag that there's something up. There's a reason why that house hasn't moved, because everything else is moving so quickly. But the good news about that bucket B is if that property is overpriced and you see that home, you can more than likely negotiate on that property, as well as now you may only be competing with 1, 2, or maybe no other buyers, and you got a better chance because that seller has seen their home sit on the market for a few weeks that they're willing to negotiate with you. So that's the bucket B property. And a lot of times it takes me about 2 to 3 months for my client to truly understand the market and to know, okay, this is that bucket A property, this is the bucket B property. I'm willing to do a little bit of work. Now, cosmetically, it may have wallpaper, it may have popcorn ceilings, it may have certain things that aren't the things you get most excited about, right out the gate. But at the same time, now I know I have less competition. And if I'm willing to hire some people and do some things, I can get a really good opportunity on that property. Okay. So recently reduced prices, you don't see that too often in this market. And then it also says low offers have better chances of being accepted if the property has been on the market a while. Again, talking about that days on market factor. So you want to look at what's called the DOM, days on market, to see how long that property has been on. And just so you know, what's common right now is the good properties are going typically in the first week. Some are going the day that it hits. Some will be locked up in 24 hours. But most listing agents are going to ask for that house to sit on the market for at least 3 to 7 days. And when they do that, they're trying to make sure that there's enough exposure, that enough buyers get to see the property and have time to put their offer together, sometimes get their financing in order. In this kind of market, you have to have your financing and your numbers figured out prior to you shopping and finding the house that you like. Next slide, please. So the purchase process negotiations, when you submit an offer, so we find the perfect house, it just hit the market, and you wrote your offer and they're asking 500,000 and you wrote 500,000. You wrote full price offer, you put your best foot forward, you knew that was in your comfort zone and it fits what you're looking for. There's 3 different outcomes. One, they could say, yes, we accept your offer. It's best news. You're open in escrow. Second, they can do is they can send you a counter offer, and then you start negotiating. So if they send you a counter offer, what that means is they are giving you terms. There's 2 types of counters. There's a multiple counter offer and a single counter offer. The single counter offer, if they say, okay, we're good with your 500,000, but it says you need 45 days. If you can close in 30 days, this is your house. They're only countering 1 term. Now, trying without giving legal advice, I did go to law school, but I'm not giving legal advice. The way contracts work is an offer is given to a seller and the seller has the ability to lock that buyer up and accept their offer. When the seller sends a counter back to them, they now take away that power is gone from the seller, but they give the buyer the ability to lock it up. The reason why this is important to understand is if you get a single counter, and even if they counter price by about $5,000, usually that only changes your payment about $30 a month on a 30-year loan, right? So that's just on average. You always want to check with your loan officer, but it's not a huge difference in your payment. But for that seller, that's an extra $5,000. They may need that dollar for dollar to qualify for their next purchase or whatever the case is. So if you get a $5,000 counter back and you have the ability to lock them up, I'm 9 times out of 10 going to tell my client, okay, you want to accept that offer, because the second they say yes to it, that seller is committed and locked into your offer. You as a buyer have many ways out of that contract. They're called contingencies, good faith excuses out of the contract, but that seller is basically locked in. The only way they can get out is a couple different exceptions, but one main one is you have to not do one of your things in the timeline, and we're going to talk about that coming up shortly. And if you don't do something within your time period, they can send you a notice of buyer to perform, something in writing saying, hey, you got 48 hours to put in your earnest money deposit. And if you still don't do it after that 48-hour notice, now that seller can cancel. But otherwise, that seller is locked in, and you as the buyer are in the driver's seat, and you can close that transaction, and that's your home. So that's why it's so important to understand this concept that if you get a single counter offer in this market, you want to look at it very heavily, because if you counter those days or you counter anything in it, you lost that power to lock them up. So you can't change your mind and say, well, I was just testing them to see if they would have took $2,500 instead of that $5,000 difference. Second you tested them, now an offer from left field comes in and they got a multiple offer and they're like, you know what, we're going to go with this other offer. Or you just lost that power and they can just sit and wait on the offer, because that offer is typically good for 3 days after you submit it, unless you shorten the expiration. So the final outcome is the offer is rejected. If they say, nope, we reject your offer, maybe you came in too low on that offer, whatever the case is, everything's killed from that point. You would have to resubmit if there's still time to resubmit another offer. Next slide, please. All right, so just checking on time here too, because I know we started a little bit different from what we were looking at. So I want to make sure that I give you guys as much as possible. Francine, if you're on there, when's my end time? When's my dead stop that I have to finish by?
12:40. So you have another 40 minutes.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to spend the time mostly on the timeline as we come up, but I've already touched on a little bit of it. But thank you, Francine. All right. So getting into the earnest money deposit. So after your offer, if you already started, or if you have notes in front of you, draw a line across your piece of paper. horizontal line from left to right. And on the very left, put the number 0. On the very right, let's write the number 45 because we're going to do 45 days. I'm just going to assume we're doing down payment assistance. I'm going to assume that we need 45 days to close this transaction. Okay. In the middle of that line, draw another line and put the number 17. Then to the right of that, put the number 21 and try to space this out so it looks, like it's your regular timeline there. Then to the right of the 0, you're going to put the number 3. In between the 3 and the 17, you're going to put a 7. So you have a 0, a 3 days to get your earnest money in, 7 days for the seller to get you disclosures, 17 days to remove all your contingencies but your loan. So that's going to be your appraisal. And we're going to go over this. Don't worry if you're not getting all this. More importantly, I just want you to get the numbers down. And other contingencies other than the loan. 21 days before you have to be fully committed. That's the 3 weeks. Okay. Then you're going to have 5 days prior to close of escrows called your VP. So let's just put it at day 40 will be your VP, your verification of property condition. Day 45 is going to be your close of escrow. So if you have that timeline going across, this is going to be a very important visual as I explain all this, because I'm going to talk about your due diligence period. And when I really emphasize the point that your goal up front is to negotiate and get that offer accepted, to get that seller committed to you, because time is on the seller's side. What I mean by that is when you have this much buyer interest in homes, time is on the seller's side. The longer the seller takes, the more offers and the more buyers that get to see the home and submit and bid that property up. So your goal is to shorten that time frame and get them to say yes as quickly as possible, and to figure out a way with your agent to get the best price for the best home at any given point in time. Okay. So after we get our offer accepted, and this is when I have a lot of questions about, what about termite? Well, what about these things that need to be fixed? I don't know if I want to write full price, right? And I'm sharing with them, I said, look, we got a second and a third possible opportunity to negotiate. We have 21 days, almost 3 weeks in most situations after our offer gets accepted before we have to fully commit and move forward with the transaction. And what I mean by fully commit is this earnest money deposit. So an earnest money deposit, one of the terms in your offer you have to write is what's called an EMD, is what the agents call it. And that's your earnest money deposit. It's almost like a security deposit if you're going to rent a property. It's a good faith deposit for if your offer gets accepted. And typically it's 1 to 3% of the purchase price. So we use the $500,000 example. So at $500K, 3% would be $15,000 that you have to submit, not to the seller directly, but into what's called escrow. And that slide's coming up here, but if you still got that same page, draw escrow, write escrow, draw a circle, put escrow in the middle of it. And then you can draw like 4 lines going out like an octopus, 4 different lines. And you can put buyer on one side, seller on another side. And then you got, let's just put loan officer, and then we'll put title. Okay. And there's more arms to the octopus than the 4, but that escrow's right in the middle. They're that entity, and escrow's got two different definitions, which we're going to get into. But that earnest money goes into a neutral third party's escrow account, and it sits in there, and it stays in there. After your offer gets accepted, you have 3 business days. So if your offer gets accepted on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday don't count. You got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday by the end of business, which is typically 5 o'clock, to either wire that earnest money deposit. If it's $15,000, you got till the end of Wednesday to wire that money in, or you can drop off a check to escrow directly. Most will take personal checks. You always want to ask them, okay, do you take cashier's checks? I know there's some escrow companies, ironically, that don't take cashier's checks. They actually prefer a personal check, which you would think a cashier's is better. So you want to verify that, right? You want to make sure you're taking it to the right escrow company. There's also a lot of wire fraud right now. So you want to speak to the escrow officer, make sure, and maybe do a 3-way with your agent, and have your agent on a conference call, talk to the escrow officer, make sure it's all verified. And once you know it's the right people, then they're going to give you the routing number for the wire information. Now, an earnest money can be used for multiple things. One, it's typically your first payment towards your total cash to close. Now, I'm going to speak just in terms of down payment assistance, because I know many of the buyers on here are going to use down payment assistance. There's a lot of times, our last one only needed $5,000 towards their total cash to close because they had $50,000 in down payment assistance. So the earnest money amount we did was $5,000. The good news in that situation is once that 5,000 is in, that buyer had no other cash to close to come in with. They were good. They were good to go. 5,000 was it. And now they got their money in, already sitting in that escrow account. Now, the good news is we get to do our due diligence and we get to make sure this house is what we want. And if it isn't what we want, we have those 3 weeks to get out of the transaction. And knock on wood, and I say knock on wood, in the 130 plus transactions we've closed, we've never lost an earnest money deposit for any of our clients, right? And that's very important. It's because we know the contract, because we know our time frames. We do everything up front and we have plenty of time to negotiate. And if it's not what we like, we got plenty of time to get out of the transaction and get that full earnest money deposit back. As long as you have your contingencies, your good faith excuse is still open, at least one or a few of them. And again, not giving legal advice, this is where you want to rely on the agent. And every agent, just so you know, who's a licensed realtor, remember that term realtor at the beginning of the presentation? If they're an actual realtor, not just somebody who passed the test, who has a real estate license, but somebody who's paying dues as a realtor, they have access to what's called the Car Attorney Hotline. It's the California Association of Realtors hotline. When they call that hotline, they can check and find out, okay, this is my situation. What does it look like my rights are as a buyer, or how can I get out of that contract? So they get to talk to a licensed attorney and get advice. Not, they always say not legal advice, but you're asking legal questions in regards to the contracts. And this is somebody who's going to try to keep you out of court. Okay, this is somebody who's going to try to protect you. So every licensed realtor has access to that car attorney hotline. That's a huge tip to know as a consumer in this type of market. Okay, so again, the other things that can happen with the earnest money is it could go towards your total cash close. So if you actually fully commit, close the transaction at 21 days, remove all your ways out of the contract, now your earnest money is on the line. Now, if it was $5,000, that 5K is on the line. If it was 3% of $515,000, you have $15,000 that seller could potentially go after. They don't automatically get it, but there's a dispute process that I don't know if we'll have time to get through it. Just know, and if you have questions after this, feel free. I know Francine's going to give my email to shoot me an email afterwards, and I'd be more than happy to help out. If you're already working with another agent, I can't step on any toes and I can't cross any lines there. There's a code of ethics we're held to. So I'm not giving any advice or trying to overstep anything if you're working with another agent. But if you aren't working with an agent and you have a question, please feel free to shoot me an email. Okay, so now if you cancel, you get all your money back. If you move forward, it's going towards your cash to close. Let's go to the next slide, please. Escrow. So now you had that circle. They actually got a box on here. So I gave you the wrong shape, right? But it's the same idea. You got the escrow agent, escrow company, the escrow office, and then it says buyer provides money. That's your earnest money deposit. So say you did 5,000 on your initial earnest money deposit, but you actually needed 12,000 total cash to close. Before you close, you're going to have to also wire or bring a check for the remaining funds to have your final cash to close in the final week of your escrow period. Okay, that all goes to the escrow officer. Then it says seller provides clear title to the property. What that means, clear title is meaning there's no liens on the property. Nobody owes child support. Nobody's been sued and there was a lien that was attached because maybe there was a mechanic's lien or something of that sort in terms of a contractor didn't get paid, so they filed a lien on the property. Okay, so you're making sure that you're not inheriting any back taxes, any of that. That's why your closing costs, some of that down payments that's covering closing costs, is also going towards what's called title insurance to ensure that you have a clean title. And there's slides on that coming up towards the end as well. Escrow carries out closing instructions according to the sales contract. What that means is you have a contract, you write your offer, and we're going to see that form coming up here. It's called the RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement. Once all the terms have been finalized and the price has been agreed upon, as well as all the other terms, it gets sent to escrow. Escrow memorializes it on what's called escrow instructions. So we want to double check that and make sure that matches what our contract is. So the contract is still what's going to hold weight. If the escrow and the contract are a little different, we'll change those escrow instructions and we'll have to amend it and get changes to make sure everybody's on the same page and moving in the right direction. This second definition of escrow is your timeline. So if it's 45 days, that's a 45-day escrow period. All right, next slide, please. This is that purchase agreement we were talking about. So this is what your offer looks like. And a lot of times you won't actually see this page until about 4 or 5 pages in. Because in order for this to be valid, the very first page you have to see is what's called the disclosure regarding agency relationships. That's that page that talks about the fiduciary duty to work with the utmost honesty and care and loyalty to our clients and to do all that. And that's all laid out in the disclosure regarding agency relationships. So that page has to be signed first before this offer is actually valid. Then you have a possible representation of multiple buyers and offers. Then there's also a wire fraud page. And then I believe it's this page. There may be one other one that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but there's like 3 other pages before this. This page, if you look at the top of it, it's got a date on the top, and it's actually been changed a little bit since then. This is an older form. You can see where it says revised 410. The newest one was actually put out about 4 or 5 years ago. And now the date, and this is where I could tell it was an older offer, the date on the right is actually should be on the left side of the contract. So that's when the date is prepared. Then as you go down, it's going to list the address. It's going to list the days on market. That's your 45 days. So the terms I'm going to ask you as a buyer is I'm going to say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, how many days do you want for this escrow? And a lot of buyers are like, I don't know. What do you recommend? I'll say, well, we want to check with the loan officer, and we'll call the loan officer. Loan officer says, I need 45 days. So, okay, we're going to put 45 days on there. Then it's going to say, what's the price? So what price do we want to offer? They're asking 500K. Well, let's offer 500. We really like this property. All right. So we write 500,000 for the price. Then the next question I'm going to ask is, what do you want for your earnest money deposit? Do you want to offer 1%, 3%? What do you want to do? And they'll say, well, what do you recommend? I'll say, well, I recommend an amount, the most that you can do up to 3%, because in this competitive market, the bigger your earnest money deposit is, the higher likelihood they see that you're a stronger buyer. So it does make you look stronger. But once that amount's agreed upon, now that's the amount you have to submit into escrow. So if it's for $15,000, you need to make sure that you can clear 15 out of the bank and still pay your bills, because that money is either going to go towards your closing, or you're going to need it back if you decide to cancel that transaction. Okay, that's all that we have on this page here. Those are the main questions. Other things I'm going to ask is, what appliances do you want included? If there's anything else that you want to make sure that we ask for, and then we'll get the loan terms from the loan officer. I believe that's about it that I'm going to ask for on this this page. The other ones are on the second and third page, which we're not going to go through. Next slide, please. Okay, so purchase process and contingencies. I've already touched on it, so I'm going to be pretty quick with it. Contingency. If you're writing this down, right? Contingency is good faith excuse out of the contract. So just imagine, as a buyer, just remember that buyers a very consumer protective state, or California is a consumer protective state. And what that means is you as a buyer are taking all the risk in purchasing a home. So the contract is built to give you many ways out of the contract. Those are your contingencies, your good faith excuses out of the contract. So if you visualize a hallway, you're going to have 10 different doors wide open. At any point in time, one door is going to be the home inspection door. The next one's going to be the loan approval door. That's actually going to be your last one. You're going to have an appraisal door that's open. You're going to have it could be a home sale contingency. That means somebody has to sell a house. So that's a little bit of a different twist there. And I'll talk about that on a side note. Then you have a title contingency. That's your prelim title. You also have termite. You also, so there's all these different ways. If you're looking at a condo or townhouse, it could be a HOA. So it's what's called CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It's a big packet of rules. If you move into an HOA, that's another way out. So you as a buyer have 10 different ways out, and it's more than that. But let's just say 10 doors wide open. At any point in time during that transaction, you can walk out at any point. So after your offer is accepted, you got any of those ways to walk out as long as that door is open. Once you get through these timelines, so as we look at that timeline, you're at 3 days, you got your earnest money deposit in. Once that EMD is in, now that door's shut. You don't have that way out. Once the seller's gotten you all their disclosures 7 days in, now that door is shut. You don't have that. And it doesn't shut automatically. We have to physically remove these contingencies. There's a form called the CR form. That's a very important form to know about and to talk with your agent about what does this mean? Because when you remove those ways out of the contract, it's done. That door is shut. You can't reopen it. Okay, next slide, please. It's usually at a time that I like to check in with the audience and see where everybody's at. Okay, but I'm going to just keep powering through it. So I'm hoping I'm keeping it interesting, but these are some important concepts to understand. So the home inspection, we're typically going to hire a professional home inspector, and these are some sites that you can look up. Ask your agent, do you have anybody you recommend working with? Usually they're going to give you 3 different recommendations. That's something they do on a liability standpoint. You can look to check to see if these inspectors are a member of ASHI or NAHI. And these are just different companies that will say that they're, I don't know if it's a truly regulated industry, but it just requires some classes and some certifications there. Typically, your home inspection is going to cost somewhere between, it says 3 to 5, but I would say realistically about $400 to $500 is pretty common for a home inspection. And you're going to do a general home inspection. What that means is your home inspector is a jack of all trades, master of none. And when I say master of none is they're going to look for red flags, look for electrical, look for plumbing. They should get in the attic. Some will get on the roof, some won't get on the roof. So sometimes it requires an actual roof inspection. Or if they see stains or something that looks like a red flag, they're going to recommend that you get a roof inspector or a chimney inspector. So this first one is your first inspection. And if you're keeping that list, I want you to write down out-of-pocket expenses. On out-of-pocket expenses, home inspections are going to be a big one. And we're always going to recommend that you do a home inspection. Just about in every situation. The only time you may waive that inspection would be as if it fell out of escrow and a previous buyer just did a home inspection and it looks like a reputable company and it looks like a thorough inspection that you can see what you need from that first inspection. That would be the only time I would even advise that there's a chance, and we still may hire our own home inspector after that. So that home inspection, I would just write the number 425 to 450 is a realistic number for most people on their home inspection. The other out of pocket is going to be your appraisal. Appraisal is typically going to run somewhere between $450 to $600. Okay. Then if you have other inspections, now termite $75, that's pretty common for $75. You could also have HVAC. I know my HVAC guy is about $95 for his inspection. You could have a roof. Roof could be $150 to $250. As you see, it could start adding up pretty quick. But just in general, you're roughly going to have about $1,000 to, let's just say, $1,500 between your appraisal and your inspections. That is part of the cost of doing business. What I mean by that is if you cancel and you get your full earnest money back, your inspection and your appraisal and these things, if the appraisal has been 100% completed, meaning they went out, they inspected it, they've already given you a report and they gave you the findings, and you cancel because you can't come to an agreement with the seller, these costs are gone. This is the cost of doing business. So typically it's going to be somewhere between $1,000 to $1,500. So the thing I want to warn you about is there are some agents that are afraid as they go into escrow and they want you to spend the least amount as possible up front. So they'll just say, okay, let's do the home inspection first. See what comes up on that. Let's hold off on the appraisal. I highly recommend you don't do that. The reason why I say that is this method is setting you up for a tight timeline at the very end. Because when you do your inspection and appraisal up front, you're going to know everything up front. And I know it can be a lot of money, but that's you're looking at a lot of times a $300, a $400, a $500, a $700,000 property that you're going to be purchasing. This is a very good investment to know exactly what you're getting, even if you decide to walk away. So don't try to be tight with money up front and saving on an inspection or an appraisal and then waiting to the last minute to do it, because there's a turnaround time for an appraisal. I always say 7 days, at least 7 days from when they do the inspection to when you get the report back. And it can take longer than that. And so if we're trying to strategically wait on that and you get close to that 17 or 21 day period, and now you have to risk all your earnest money deposit and you haven't gotten an answer on whether they're going to drop their price or negotiate repairs with you, you're going to have a lot of pressure to put all that money on the line. And in this kind of market, it's just it's asking for disaster. So take my advice, do the appraisal, do the inspection up front. Next slide, please. Okay, so red flags on the inspection: cracked heater, moisture in the basement. We don't have basements here. This is a national thing here, but basements aren't very common, right? Defective roofing and or flashing. So a lot of signs in the roof, you'll see, you can look at it a lot of times visually, and none of us are experts and the agents are experts, and see if it looks like it's fairly newer or it's something that's getting towards the end of its life. And that's what you want your home inspector getting up there and checking it out if they can. The other thing they're going to look for is stains. Your termite inspection is not good just for termites. They also look for what's called Section 2. Section 1 is active infestation. That means something that there's actual termites already in the property. Section 2 is something that could lead to infestation. So that could be stains in the roof, in the attic. It could be stains in the garage. It could be there was a plumbing leak. They're actually going to check your toilets, see if the toilets are loose, or they're going to open up behind the sinks and see if there looks like there's stains back there. And if there is, they have to note it. They are held to a standard of care, and they have to note whether they find those things. So if they do, now you have a red flag that you may have a leak issue. You may have a moisture issue. And depending on the type of loan, and most loans aren't going to require Section 1 and Section 2 to be fixed, but Section 2 is something that does come up. Section 2, sorry, family just came in right now, so apologize if you hear some background noise. But Section 2 is something that could lead to it. So it's sometimes negotiable, but it is a red flag to you if I may want to think about getting a professional plumber in there to make sure there's no active leak, or actually getting a professional roof inspection. The other thing I'll ask my home inspector to do is if he or she has a moisture detector, to take that moisture detector and go over the stain to see if it's actively wet or not. So if you just had some recent rains and you did a home inspection, a lot of people think that's bad. That's actually a good thing, because now you can check and see, okay, is there anything that's wet there at the property? Okay. So then we have insect infestation. That's your termite. But there could also be some other pest issues that your inspector will typically tip you out on. Then you have mixed plumbing, aluminum wire. Mixed plumbing is the type of plumbing. You want to keep it all one. Sorry, I got my daughter. She's only 1.5 years old in the background. Just 1 second. I'll be right back. Danielle? Apologize about it. I got a family of 3. You know how this working for home thing's working for all of us. So hopefully I still got you here. So if it's a serious problem, you try to negotiate to have the repairs done. You're going to write what's called that request for repairs. The other option is to cancel the transaction. Remember, you do this during your due diligence period, you can still cancel the transaction. That's some of the leverage you have as a buyer, that in this market, most sellers aren't going to be overly concerned if you cancel, because they're going to have another buyer right behind them, typically pretty quick. Next slide, please. All right, so an appraisal, what is it? So we gave the example of the 500,000 at the very beginning of this section. So say the appraisal comes in at 480,000. What does that mean? Well, what that means is this appraiser who you pay for, that works for you as the buyer and the lender, right? The loan officer. It's not they're still a third party. There can be no connection to you or to that lender to do any type of favors. They're there to give their own opinion of what a property is worth. So they go through, typically takes 15 to 25 minutes. They take pictures of the property. They're going to look to make sure, they're going to look at the condition of the home. They're going to research the recent comps, typically within the last 6 months. In this type of market, they're going to look very heavily. They should look very heavily on the similar homes that sold less than a month, 2-3 months ago, because the market has changed so much over the last 3 months. So comps and appraisal issues are very common right now, especially in these bidding war situations. So if you come across it where you get a low appraisal of 480, you got a few options. One, you can ask the seller to drop the price to 480. It's not likely they're going to do that in this market, but they may be willing to work with you. Maybe they like you. Maybe they really want to try to sell this home to you, even though they have backup offers. So they could say yes. 2, they could say no. And if they say no, then you have the right to cancel the transaction. Or you can try to come up with the money for the difference. So if it's a $20,000 difference, now that means you got to come in with an additional $20,000 on top of what your original total cash to close was. So if you and the loan officer spoke up front, knew your total cash to close was $12,000, and now you got a $20,000 difference, you have to have an additional $20K access to make this transaction work out. Okay. So, or they can meet you in the middle somewhere and sometimes drop it $10,000. So it's like, hey, I don't have 20, I got 10. Are you willing to take 10? We'll pay 10 over the appraised value. We really want this house. Those are options. Okay. And again, worst case, if you don't like it, you back out of the transaction and you get your earnest money deposit, as long as you're doing that within your 21-day period. Next slide, please. So the escrow timeline, hopefully you still got this drawn out on your piece of paper here. So again, this is the quick reminder, zero is when your offer is accepted. That's day 0. Then 3 business days for your earnest money. And just so you know, for all your other timeframes, you count every single calendar day, that business day. So if you're looking at 45 days, it's 45 calendar days from the date that was accepted. If we're trying to figure out the 7 days of when the seller owes you those disclosures, to keep this as simple as possible, I know I've gone over a lot, but the 2 things to remember, you have, as a buyer, a duty to investigate the property. The seller has a duty to disclose any material facts about a home. What a material fact is anything that could have an impact on the value, that if they were buying their own home again and they knew something negative about their property that they should probably disclose to you, they have a duty to disclose that. And their opportunity to do it is on the disclosure paperwork, which is called the TDS, SPQ. So that's the transfer disclosure statement. SPQ is the seller property questionnaire. Usually you're going to get that within 7 days after acceptance. This one talks about the pre-approval letter. A lot of times you're going to get that verified down payment and closing costs even before you submit your offer. And you're going to check a box saying pre-approval letter attached. Otherwise, the seller's not going to take you, or the listing agent's not going to take you seriously. So the 7 to 17 days, what they're really saying is from actually when you open escrow till that 17 days, you have the opportunity to do your due diligence and investigate that property, do any inspections you want. We do the general one up front. Once we see that, and if we do that on day 2 or day 3, we do the inspection. About 2 days later, we get the report back. Once we look at the report, we go over that together. We decide, okay, do we want to do any further inspections, or are we happy with what we see right now? Typically from there, we're going to write a request for repairs, send that over to the seller, the listing agent. They can respond to it. They don't have to respond to it. Now, this part is what a lot of agents still get confused about. The reason why I say that is they think that it's mandatory for a listing agent or a seller to respond to a request for repairs, and they think it affects the timelines. It has nothing to do with the timeframes. I said earlier that the seller has some mandatory things they have to fix. And by law, all they have to fix is the water heater, smoke detector, and carbon monoxide detector. Those are the only 3 things that have to be up to code. Now, if you're buying in Ventura, there is a sewer lateral inspection that you need to have clearance from a seller on detached homes. For condos, a lot of times it gets waived. Okay, so you want to check with your agent to check with that, typically if it's a condo, with that HOA and that property management company to find out, is it a requirement for the sewer lateral inspection or not? And if it's not, you want to know that up front. So that's another question, due diligence question that you and your agent should be doing, okay? If you go out to LA, they have other things like gas shutoff valve and other things that are requirements that all have to be clear and in compliance before you close that transaction. Ventura County, just sewer lateral, or I'm sorry, water heater, smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector. All right, 17 calendar days, it says, or 5 days after receipt, in writing, remove contingencies or cancel. What they're referring to there is at the 17-day mark. And again, one thing that I have to share with you to not confuse you more is these timeframes can be shortened by a counteroffer. If you're in a multiple counteroffer situation, it can be shortened, okay? So that's important to understand. I hope you can hear me okay. One sec. Let's take it. So on the 21 days, if you remove all contingencies, now you're fully committed, and we're going to have a call with the loan officer and say, do we have the final clear to close? This is very important. A lot of times you hear conditional approval. It's okay depending on what the conditions are. Sometimes, especially if you're self-employed, you need to make sure that they've gone through everything with the underwriter to tell you you're good to go. Because again, nobody wants to put that earnest money at risk if we don't know for certain we're able to get that house. Once you hear you have the final clear to close, you are about 99% certain that you're getting that property, okay? But you need to hear that final clear to close, and you need to make sure that you have all contingencies removed. All right, so 5 days prior to close of escrow, that's a verification of property condition. If you got, say they agreed to do the termite work, they agreed to fix some plumbing issues and to fix a couple other things. So we'll just say X, Y, Z. Before we do the final walkthrough, I'm going to call the other agent and say, hey, have all the repairs been fixed? We're about to do our final walkthrough. And they'll say, yes, it has been done, or no, all of them have been done but one thing, or none of them have been done yet. Now we get to go do that verification of property condition. If it hasn't been done, we're going to note it on that. If we see any new holes in the wall, anything that happened after those sellers moved out, we're going to note it on there. This is really your last chance because you've already removed all your contingencies. This is your last chance to have something in writing to confirm that we can close this transaction. So you want to do it at least typically somewhere between 5, to the day before you close escrow. Once it already funds and records, it's already too late to do a verification of property condition. Then you're going to hear funding and close of escrow. Close of escrow is when it confirms and it's officially in your name. Next page, please. Okay, so preparing for closing. Apologize about the crying in the back. Hopefully you guys can hear okay. So when we prepare for the closing, we're in the final week, we're in the home stretch. You're going to do that final walkthrough we just talked about. Other thing you're going to do, and this is typically a little bit earlier, but you're going to get a homeowner's insurance policy. So that's something typically you're going to talk to your lender about. Your lender is going to say, hey, we need that policy. You're going to get an escrow package from escrow. So you have paperwork from your agent. Then you have paperwork from escrow and a package that's going to come to you and either be mailed to you directly to your house or go to your agent. And then your agent's going to give it to you. And in that package, they're going to say, how do you want to hold title? That's called your vesting instructions, and a bunch of other documents. One of them is going to be, what's your homeowner's insurance policy? So in that policy, you're going to fill it out. Now, you don't have to pick who you want yet, but you at least need to get an estimate and list their name, their contact information and info. That is a condition prior to close. They want to make sure you got insurance on that home in case anything happens. So obtain a copy of the closing disclosure. What the CD is, that comes out around day 21. So at about 21 days into escrow, or when you're within about that last week of closing, when you get loan docs, you have what's called a closing disclosure. This is something that's newer that came out about 4 years ago, something called TRID that you don't need to know about, but it's to ensure that what you were quoted up front when you were given your loan estimate, and this is what your payment's going to be. This is the interest rate. These are all your costs. You're also going to get that on the closing disclosure, and it can't vary by much. If it does vary by much, then that loan officer can be in trouble. So they have to keep it very tight with what their original estimate is. So you get that closing disclosure to verify everything is what was promised to you up front prior to you signing loan docs. So you have 3 days after you sign that closing disclosure that you're going to get loan docs. Loan docs is a big stack of paperwork that are all the official terms that you're going to sign off with. If it's you and your spouse or you by yourself or whoever's on the loan has to sign all those loan docs. And if you're doing down payment assistance, it could be 3 sets of loan docs, which is a lot of paperwork, as you can imagine. So you're going to need to stretch your thumbs out pretty good before you're doing that. Okay, so signing closing documents and pay for closing costs. Those are the loan docs we were talking about. And there's also some additional closing documents, but paying for the closing costs, it's your additional cash to close. Now, if you got down payment assistance, they could be giving you a lot of assistance. But this is a very important number. It's not how much money down do I have to put. It's what is my total cash to close you want to know from your loan officer. And you're going to get it up front. And then you're going to want to verify it when you're about 2-3 weeks in and have that money ready to go. It's got to come from a particular account. Any type of money questions you have, you talk to your loan officer. A lot of times they'll ask me as the agent, I'll say, talk to your loan officer. You got to speak to the loan officer, because if you buy a big item and you put it on your credit card and you're excited and you're already buying flooring and you're buying furniture and you're buying all this stuff because you know you got approved for your house and you're going to be closing on such and such date and you want to have it all ready to go, you better check with your loan officer before you do that. And we do a good job of coaching our clients that, and the loan officers should also be doing a good job. I know BCCDC does, but if you're working with somebody else, make sure that they are telling you to check with them before you make any big moves with your money, with your credit, any of that, because you don't want to jeopardize your closing. All right. So calling the utility companies to arrange dates of service. The other thing you'll ask your agent is, hey, can you reach out to the other side, find out who all the utility companies are so we can transfer a service? That can save you an additional charge, Plus, you want to make sure you got lights on when you go move into your next property. The final tip they have on here is do not give your 30-day notice to your landlord unless you're 100% confident of your final loan approval and your closing date. That's important to know because just because your offer got accepted, you have that 21-day typically due diligence period. And until you're fully committed and you know you got that final clear to close, that's what that final loan approval is. You don't want to give your 30-day notice. You're probably going to have some overlap, and that's okay. It's okay if you're spending a little bit extra money on some overlap because now you can have some time to move and you're still not forced out of one house to be into the next property. You can fix some things up before you move in, whatever the case is, but make sure you haven't given your 30-day notice until you are 100% certain you're moving in on that property. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this one we're going to be quick. We already talked about the closing disclosure, mortgage note. That's going to be in your loan documents as long as your deed of trust is also something that's going to be signed by the seller. So the mortgage note is basically your loan terms. The deed of trust is the actual document. There's something that the sellers will sign and have notarized that you'll receive a copy of that once you close that transaction. Title insurance, escrow analysis, and title abstract, those are all tied together. Those are all documents that are making sure that your title is clean, free, and clear when you get that property. Next slide, please. So some closing costs. Most of these are typical that the sellers are going to pay for. There are some that the buyers are going to pay for, but closing costs usually range from 3 to 5% of the loan amount. And that's if you're doing down payment assistance, a lot of times this is already pre-negotiated. If you're not doing down payment assistance, then you want to ballpark guess 3 to 5 seems a little bit on the higher side, but 3% is very common. So if your loan amount, if you're buying a $500,000 property and your loan amount, let's just say is roughly 500, 3% is about 15K. That seems on the higher side for total closing costs, but it's fees for obtaining the loan. That's loan origination fees, certain costs to do the loan, escrow and title fees. Escrow and title, buyers have it and sellers have it. So they have their own fees, you have your own fees. Recording documents, document transfer taxes. A lot of times that's going to be paid by the seller, and it's on page 3 of the purchase agreement that says seller pays for document transfer tax, seller pays for HOA doc fees, seller pays for this, they pay for the home warranty, prepaid taxes. The prepaid taxes is something that you're going to have on the buying side based on when you're closing the transaction. Again, that's what you want to talk to your loan officer, your agent, and your escrow officer to get a rough idea so you know your amounts ahead of time. Insurance premiums, again, something you're going to check out with your insurance and your loan officer. Then prepaid interest, that's also going to be with your loan officer. So you'll have these closing costs in your estimate. You also have some on the CD, and there's something that's called an estimated closing cost sheet that I'll typically get from my escrow officer to make sure everybody's on the same page. If we can do it right when we open escrow, we'll get rough amounts, but then we'll get a more accurate one as we get towards closing. Next page, please. That's it. It was a piece of cake. I wish we didn't wrap up with the closing costs, but after all that, now you are a homeowner. This is a happy family that BCCDC represented and helped them become homeowners, which is an amazing thing, especially here in Ventura County. You know, the biggest thing I can share, I know it can be an overwhelming process. And if you're missing out on property after property in terms of offers being accepted, it can be very daunting. But the thing I can tell you, if you work with the right people, you will get the house that you're looking for. Get the right people around you, control what you can control, and put your best foot forward, and you're going to find the right home. I believe everything happens for a reason, and work with the right people and put your best foot forward, and you will become a homeowner. Next slide, please. Any questions?
We had a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
So one question is, I've seen the TV ads for online brokers. What is the difference from using them versus a local broker?
Okay, can you ask that person just in terms of, are they referring to, and broker gets thrown around, it can mean either on the loan side, loan broker, or a real estate broker. Are they referring to in terms of doing their loans with a certain interest rate, or are they talking about having?
Sorry, like real estate brokers.
Okay.
In the sense, the ones on commercials, buy it online kind of a thing versus an actual human like you.
Okay. Purple. So there were some companies out there, and there are a lot of advertisements out there that try to get you to go directly through doing something online. As you heard the process in terms of your due diligence period and what needs to happen, I highly recommend that you get a human, you get somebody who has experience, who's gonna protect your best interest through the process. Um, if there's some type of incentive to go online, they're trying to capture you by wavering, hey, we can give you some money if you work with us that could help towards your closing costs. We can do this for you, we can do that for you. Most of that, they're trying to attract you to them. Do your research, do your due diligence, find out what their track record is, try to make sure they have positive reviews. And if it still sounds like a good idea, give it a shot. But I would, I'm not saying it just because I'm a human and an actual real estate agent. I'm saying it just from experience of seeing all the things that can go wrong, as well as how difficult it is to get your offer accepted in this kind of market. You want the best representation possible by somebody who can communicate at a high level, and they also have to be able to advocate on your behalf. And when I'm a listing agent, when I'm selling a home and I got 10, 15 offers to pick from, or let's just say I have 2, 3 offers to pick from, I'm going to really evaluate who's their representation. Who are they doing the loan with? Who's their real estate agent? Is this a good agent who knows what they're doing? Have they closed transactions recently? I'm interviewing for a job. This is somebody I have to work with to successfully close a transaction. So if it's from some online company, out of area person that I have no clue who this person is, they're probably not going to get their offer accepted. I'm just being upfront. I'm going to go with somebody who I know and I have experience closing transactions with. I know they're a good agent. I know they're good in the community. I know they're honest. I know they're fair. And they're going to do their best and represent their client. And I'm going to do my best to represent my client. And we're all going to work together to close that transaction. So I hope that answered that question. That's kind of a tough one. But if you have any other questions, again, feel free to email me or reach out. I don't know if you give cell phone numbers, but I'd be happy to explain that in a little bit more depth.
We did. We put your email and cell phone, how to contact you. And
Awesome.
last question.
Uh-huh.
What is the strangest? I follow a page called Zillow Gone Wild. What is the strangest property you have ever represented?
The strangest property I've ever represented? Oh wow. I got to think back on that one. But that's just an interesting one. I know I've seen some when we were doing actually when I was at BCCDC and we were looking at foreclosed properties and we would acquire homes and fix them up and put them on the market for many of our buyers. We aren't doing that currently, but that was something and it may come up in the future. We would walk into some very interesting situations. And unfortunately, certain homes that have sat vacant for some time in the market, when the market crashed and people started losing their homes because of these adjustable bad mortgages, that's one thing BCCDC has never done is they give 30-year fixed loans. These are very conservative loans that are built to make you succeed. The loans that were happening back then weren't built that way, and they were very profit driven, so they were very risky. So some homes would sit vacant for a couple months, and we went into one property. We got it through an auction, go into the place, and there was not only was the place destroyed and disgusting, we go up and it was sad. It was in one of the master bedrooms that was furthest away from the street. And it was the first time that when we walked up and put our sign up, we literally had 3 or 4 neighbors come up and thank us for acquiring that property because it had sat vacant. And what was happening is people were breaking into the home, doing drugs and other things in the property. There was a small little kid's mattress. I felt so bad in the restroom. There's no water, there's no plumbing, there's no nothing. You saw some other like toothpaste and some other things that were in there. So people were living in there. And the neighbor next door, they had a little bit of PTSD because there was a time that cops came and the people jumped out of their backyard into the next backyard. So BCCDC has done some amazing things. I'm not just putting the plug because, you're hosting this. I'm proud to be a part of BCCDC in the past. I'm proud to contribute the way that I do now and just having the time. I hope there was some helpful information here because I've seen the impact that this organization has had on the community. Just want to thank you guys again for your time. I hope there was some helpful information and know it's a lot. So I apologize for trying to cram it all in that period of time, but thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Brandon. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, email, text. You can still call people. It's an amazing feature. Like I tell my kids, you know, you dial a number and someone answers and you talk. You can still do that. So feel free to do that with Brandon. Thank you so much. And now moving on so we can get everyone back to their Taco Tuesday, as today is Taco Tuesday, everyone. And the day before St. Patty Day, so it's a double whammy. We have